As a mother and an associate professor of psychology, what message do you have for tech companies out there about AI?
Children are our future. Children are our future politicians, our future CEOs, our future teachers. So message would be safety, safety, safety. And if you think that the things that we need to do for children are just for children, that's not true. It's for people across the life course.
Generative AI is transforming life as we know it, not just in the workplace, but in governance, ethics, and beyond. Here at the AI Lab, we're dissecting all of it to help you make sense of it. I'm Melissa Mahtani, your host of this episode, and today we're talking about parenting in the age of AI with Dr. Alex Sturm, an associate professor of psychology at LMU. As well as researching the science of childhood development, Alex is a mother, navigating the practicalities of raising kids in a world increasingly shaped by technology. Alex, great to have you with us.
Melissa, thanks so much for having me.
So many of us are just figuring out AI ourselves. It's tough to be a parent to think about how you would advise kids. Yet, as I was doing some research for this episode, I came across a study, a Pew Research study from December, that tells us that 1 in 3 teenagers use AI chatbots daily. And this isn't just for homework, it's for companionship, emotional support, relationship advice. What kind of conversations do parents need to be having with their kids right now about AI?
I think parents need to get back to basics in terms of parenting. We know that there's something called authoritative parents. Authoritative parents are really warm, but also firm and set very clear boundaries for their kids. They're clear communicators. Their children know what to expect from them. If you'd asked a child, how would your parent react in this situation? Those children with authoritative parents would be able to say exactly how their parent would react. So they know what to expect. And that's where we need to go. And conversations around AI are going to be shaped also by parents creating really supportive boundaries for their children around AI. So what I'm trying to say is it's not limited to one conversation. AI is now a part of our lives, and parents have to treat it as a part of our lives, just like technology.
Parenting is so vast, different children, different ages, they need different things. So let's talk through some of the different stages. What about sort of young kids, like 6 or 7? What are some of the biggest issues for them?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. So I have a child who's 4 and a child who's 7, both boys, and they're in very different places developmentally. AI is integrated into so many things in our lives that we don't even realize. So Alexa, for example, and my 4-year-old knows how to ask Alexa what time it is and what the weather is going to be. But that's really the limit of his engagement. I joke with my friends too that he's not really sure right now whether Paw Patrol are real or not real, right? So he's not really going to understand this idea that AI is a robot. But with a 7-year-old, you could really start to have conversations. And one critical thing for children to be able to understand, and adults as well, and sometimes the line gets blurred, is that AI is not human. AI is a program, and you interact with AI like a program. And the line can get very blurred because AI is designed to act in a very human way. But as we think about understanding, thinking critically about the information coming from AI, it is really important that it's framed as a program to young kids or a robot.
I think it's good advice even for us. We get so attached. And one of the really dangerous things about using AI is that it's trained to agree with you. It's so much positive reinforcement, so it makes you feel really good. There's a danger of it sort of replacing that interaction that you have.
Yeah. And if parents are able to mediate that, right, create opportunity for kids to think critically. So an example, my 7-year-old loves video games, loves video games, and decides he's going to be a gamer when he grows up. That's will be his profession, he says. He asks me all the time, how do I do this particular thing in this game? And I have no idea. I don't play the same video games he does, but I can ask AI the answer to that question. Right.
Wow.
So I'll ask the AI and have the AI speak out loud to us, usually when we're in the car. It's an activity we can do together. It's a shared interest. It's a time for us to connect about a topic he's really interested in. So this happened recently and we got home and he tried it and he's like, it didn't work. What's going on? And I said, well, it was an opportunity to talk about how sometimes the robot is wrong. And the robot doesn't necessarily have all the information, and you do have to think critically about the information that's coming from the robot. So, right, it was this embedded opportunity. It's an example of how parents, if present and a part of this conversation with AI, can mediate that experience for kids and to be able to scaffold and help them to understand what's happening.
That is a great example and great advice, because so many people feel scared about this like other AI if they don't know how to use it, whereas it can be a bonding experience. One thing I wanted to just pick up on is, when you talk about critical thinking, it's so important, and AI is being used in schools. And this is a real danger of kids losing critical thinking ability when they become dependent on a chatbot or an AI agent to do things for them. What are you seeing in the child development space for young people who are in school?
Yeah, so there are a lot of ed tech companies that are developing AI-based products, and some of those products work. They work better than if a child were trying to understand the information on their own. These ed tech companies are embedding learning principles into the use of or how the AI is delivered to students. And that is the critical ingredient. If you are not embedding learning principles, so learning principles being how do you expand on, this is just off the top of my head, how do you help kids to expand on their thinking? How do you identify errors in thinking? How do you prompt them to revisit those errors? So there's this learning and reflexive practice that's happening. That's a really critical ingredient. So if that isn't there, if the child is only using AI as information seeking or as something that is able to provide answers to them, that is a very different thing than using an AI chatbot that's been developed with these ideas of learning, which can be effective. They're not going to be as effective as a human. They're not going to be as effective as a teacher, but might be a good substitute for a kid who would otherwise be trying to learn on their own and struggling.
Wow, it's a fascinating conversation to be having and to see how it plays out. Let's talk about teenagers. So, the stat I said at the beginning, 1 in 3 teenagers are using AI daily. And we know a lot of this is for emotional support and sometimes therapy. So this is both good that teenagers feel they have somebody to go to, but bad because, again, a chatbot can be wrong and it's not a replacement for a real therapist. What are your views on that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple principles that we can think and keep in mind, right? So the idea that AI is a robot, AI is a program, AI is not a person. So there are limitations in what kind of support AI can provide. There are more research studies that are coming out where specific AI chatbots have been developed that are trained on evidence-based interventions for things like anxiety and depression. And that can be effective, but they are narrow, they are specific, and they are trained on this particular information. They're also supervised by psychologists, right? And I'm not 100% confident about this, but I would imagine there's some triaging that happens for crisis level situations. Something like ChatGPT, Claude is not very effective at identifying when someone is in crisis and when someone needs to be referred. So what happens is the system will continue to engage with the person and potentially even extend that teenager's line of reasoning. So thinking that they feel bad about themselves, they don't feel like they should be on this world anymore. That line of thinking is not questioned. That line of thinking is not flagged. And that's not identified as a crisis by the system. So AI is not very good right now, very, very bad actually, at identifying those situations and when help potentially needs to be called in.
We have seen some laws that were passed this year as a result of 3 teenagers committing suicide, and their deaths were related to chatbots. It was one in Colorado, Florida, California. There were multiple lawsuits. They've been settled. But I mean, that's really like a parent's worst nightmare. Do you think more needs to be done in terms of regulation?
Yes, I do. Parents can only do so much, right? Especially with teenagers. Anyone who has a teenager know your teenager can access basically any information they want to access if they really want to. It can't just be parents who are doing this mediation of access between their child and technology. It's also the responsibility of companies that are developing products that are amazing and can help so many people, but also carry really profound risks. And I think it's wonderful that parents are pushing back and advocating for guardrails to be put on these systems, particularly as it relates to minors, because minors can't yet make decisions for themselves legally, right? Parents are still responsible for that.
It is good that we have seen some regulation. Obviously, there is a lot more that can be done by the tech companies too. But it was really surprising to me that there's no US law that currently gives parents a right to access their child's AI chat history. And I wonder if you think they should have that right, because it's a fine line, right, between a parent's legitimate protective role, but then also like a teenager's need for an inner private life.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting topic as we continue to think through. I can see an analogous situation being medical records, right? So when parents continue to have access to their children's medical records or can no longer access their children's medical records, and that's in some states before the age of 18, but that varies state by state. So that's an interesting way to think about it, that right now there's this more diffuse regulatory system around how do we control what access parents have to their children's information, and when do we control that information and why. So I don't think I have a perfect answer because I don't know that one exists. And I imagine that as regulations are established, it's going to be maybe even variable across the US. I do know that if we think back to basics with parenting, parents mediating access. So maybe you won't be able, depending what regulations are, be able to access your child's chat history. But depending on the age of your child, you can't be there while they're interacting with AI. So thinking maybe instead of reactively looking at the back end of your child's chat history, being proactive and seeing the interaction as it plays out live. So there are different ways to think about it as a parent that might involve changing where you appear in the scenario, whether that's while use is occurring or after the fact.
I love what you said at the beginning too about, again, using chatbots together, using as a bonding experience, kind of learning together and again, encouraging trust and safety. And I guess we have to remember that not every child has a good relationship with their parents. A lot of similarities have also been drawn between AI and social media. Firstly, because of the lack of regulation, we kind of let these tech companies regulate themselves. And now we're seeing the very negative effects that social media has had in terms of like kids being addicted to their phones, depression, loneliness. For parents who kind of feel a little helpless, are there red flags that they could be aware of now in this new age of AI?
It's again, I think back to parenting basics and trusting your instincts with your kids. If you notice that something is wrong, something is probably wrong. When we think about clinical referral, parents are the most accurate source of clinical referral. The clinical referral being for things like any mental health related diagnosis. Parents are the ones who identify something is wrong. I may not know exactly what is wrong, but I know something is wrong. So being able to seek support or help from mental health professionals in that case, and parents can do that too. There's things like parent training where parents can talk to mental health professionals about their own parenting and their relationships with their kids. But I would say if your instinct is that something is wrong, something is probably wrong, and it's time to step in as a parent. I think as a parent, one of the hardest things is watching your child be upset because of something that you did. And that something you did includes setting boundaries that you know are healthy for them. So in psychology, we call that negative affect. When a kid is really upset, they might be screaming at you, they might be pounding their fists, they might be crying, maybe throwing a tantrum. And as a parent, you see your child in distress, and what you want to do is relieve that distress. And what that typically means is letting your child do the thing that you told them not to do. That isn't the answer all the time. Unfortunately, as parents, we really have to teach our kids that sometimes it's okay to be upset, because the most important thing is that you're learning these lessons that are going to help you as you continue to get older. So, also for parents to know that it's okay if your child is upset, if you are setting an important boundary, and your child is not going to hate you forever. They will get over it, right? You go back to that warm but firm parenting. The children respond really well to that boundary, not in the moment, not in the moment, but after the fact. They'd like to know what to expect from their parents.
And, we forget that AI is a resource for parents too. You can ask a chatbot what to do or look for things. But yeah, it's certainly in the moment, it doesn't feel great setting boundaries or just seeing your kid upset. For you, in both your professional teaching life and also at home, can you tell me, like, what are some of the benefits you've seen of AI and then some of the negatives?
From the parenting perspective, AI can make you superhuman, right? As a parent, I've said before that my creativity is the first thing to go, right? As a parent, you are strapped, you're trying to manage so many things. Your brain is a million different places. When your brain's in a million different places, the last thing you can be is creative, because that creativity is happening in moments of calm, right? But when you're creative, I know my kids love it when mommy does something that's really surprising, right? Or mommy does something that's really interesting, and they engage so quickly and they latch onto that. They love the social reciprocity and the social back and forth that happens. That's also creative. So for example, with my older son, I had, again, related to video games, you see the trend, wanted to accomplish something in video games. So I had AI create like a little 5-minute podcast that my sister and I recorded and played for him. And he thought that was the coolest thing in the entire world, right? So I didn't
How
tell him
sweet.
that, yeah, that AI created that for it. But mommy got a lot of cool points for seeming like I knew what was happening in that podcast, even though I was absolutely not deviating from the script of that podcast that AI had generated for me. So that's an example of how AI can make us really cool and creative as parents, right? With very little investment. I think that took us 10 minutes total. It was the prompt and then reading it out loud, one take into an iPhone, right? That I could then play for my child. So, giving us the flexibility to be fun. I think that when AI is contained, as I said, when learning principles are embedded in an AI system, it could help scaffold learning for children if it's extremely contained and supervised. I also think that, parents can have back and forths with AI about questions related to parenting. I sometimes tell college students that when you interact with AI, you want to be in the driver's seat. So you want to be able to critically evaluate information that is coming from the AI. If you feel like you are not in that position, you maybe shouldn't be using AI for that task, right? So something like parenting, parents can ask questions, right? Feeling out situations. I'm in this situation with my kid. What would an authoritative parent do? So again, those authoritative parents are warm and firm. And use it as a brainstorming session. But then parents are in the driver's seat, right? So parents can then critically evaluate, does that feel true to me? Does that feel like it's going to work in this situation for my kid or not? And make modifications. Also for kids with disabilities, being able to create a more accessible world. There's amazing opportunity in that space too. So there is so much amazing opportunity. We just need to be treating AI like the robot it is, and not like the human that sometimes we are inclined to think it is.
I think a lot of people feel powerless because they don't see a way that they can get any control. But you've already given so many examples of like using AI to help you personally use it, to also come up with ideas for you and your kids and then use it together with your child. So they were some of the positives. What about the negatives? What worries you most about this space?
Yeah, I think the late elementary, middle school, high school students, that age range, it's a period of time where kids want to be more independent. They are trying to establish their independence, but they still really need their parents. So, parents are put in a situation where their kids are resisting them. And again, the natural feeling you have as a parent when somebody tells you you're making me mad is to say, how can I make it better? But those boundaries continue to be so important. So it's just, yeah, I worry most for the kids in that age range because they have potentially the most access and they can ask really good questions and they can pursue a lot of information almost in an adult-like way, but they don't have that control center of their brain fully developed that tells them what's right and what's wrong, that helps them to evaluate whether information is credible or not. And they still really need a parent or teacher who can help them to do that. So I would say that population is the one that worries me most. And I think we've seen the same thing with social media.
One of the things I hear from a lot of my friends is that we don't know what the world is going to look like in 20 years. So it's tough to kind of advise your kid on what profession to pursue or try and help them with any of those conversations. What advice could you give to parents who are kind of grappling with that?
As parents, often our instinct is to want to prepare our kids for the future, and often we take that really concretely. So what would preparation for a world with AI look like? And your instinct is to say, I should be teaching my children how to use AI as early as possible. And I think parents can really pump the brakes on that instinct. Those who have given their child a phone ever, right, learn how quickly your child can use technology or learn to use technology. And for those of us who started to use computers, personal computers in college, look at us now using personal computers, right? We're really impressive. So these are not things that your child needs to learn very, very early on. They don't need to learn to use AI very, very early on. What they do need to learn how to do is how to evaluate whether information is credible or not, evaluate what sources information should come from, who they should go to, right, when they're concerned about something, establish really deep and nurturing social relationships between parents and their children, children and their siblings, children and their teachers, trusted adults. So again, the back to basics parenting, make sure your child is learning all of the things they need to be a good human, right? And then they will learn AI when it is appropriate or when you feel like it's appropriate for them, but it's not something that needs to happen really early.
That's really good advice. A lot of people put
Mhm.
so much pressure on themselves, but it
Yeah.
is okay to just take a pause. As a mother and an associate professor of psychology, what
Mhm.
message do you have for tech companies out there about AI?
Such a good question. I think children are our future, right? Children are our future politicians, our future CEOs, our future teachers. We need to keep this period of childhood and preserve this period of childhood and keep these children safe, right? So as we think about development, really continuing to think about safety, those children are really vulnerable, but some adults are also really vulnerable and would really benefit from the types of safety precautions and measures that we would potentially put into place for children. When we think about kids and keeping kids safe, that generalizes to our most vulnerable adults also. So message would be safety, safety, safety. And if you think that the things that we need to do for children are just for children, that's not true. It's for people across the life course, and we can use those same principles.
That is so true. I think all of us would do well to have a timer on how many hours we use AI. So you mentioned a couple of these throughout our conversation, but just concretely for parents who are feeling stressed, who are feeling helpless, what resources are there out there for them?
Yeah, there's some wonderful ones. So when I think of that back to basics parenting, the Harvard Center for the Developing Child has some really wonderful parenting resources. So I would recommend that. Refamiliarizing yourself with what it means to be a really firm and warm parent. How do you set boundaries? How are children going to react to those boundaries? Is that okay? Is that not okay? So setting these kind of typical expectations. And then you get to move to these specific cases, right? And AI is one specific case. Technology generally is another specific case. So starting there. And then there are some interesting specific resources. So there's a Substack by a clinical psychologist called Techno Sapiens that infuses a lot of parenting principles into thinking about children's use of technology. And I think that's something that parents can really think about. There's a professor, if you want to really get into the weeds, at Harvard named Dr. Shu, who's in the School of Education, and she's doing work on AI and learning in young children. So you can follow the most up-to-date information. I think Claude just came out with a few different certificate programs, and I noticed one is on teaching children and adolescents and college students to use AI, I'm pretty sure. So parents are teachers, right? We have to teach our children all the time. I noticed that there was no parenting one. How do you parent around AI? But parents could potentially educate themselves. It's difficult to teach about something you don't know. So parents should be familiarizing themselves as much as possible. And really, if your child is using AI for a particular function, you should know how to use AI for that function. And that's really, really hard. It's an investment in time, but it's a really important one. And then, of course, parents now have AI to help them to digest research studies, right? Professors, researchers are really, really bad at communicating what we find to the community and telling the community what is important and why it's important. But now parents and the community have a way of finding these research studies and having AI help them to do that bridge work. What is this telling me? Why is this important? How can this inform what I do as a parent? So parents can go straight to the source now. So you can use something like Google Scholar to look up mental health and AI and teenagers and see all the studies that came up and plug them into AI and tell AI, give me the TLDR on what this is saying. And you can learn immediately from what the researchers are doing.
I do just want to remind any of our listeners that do not put sensitive information like medical health records and things like that into AI, especially if you're using a free version, because that's an important thing that sometimes people forget. This has been such a fantastic conversation. I would love to have you back to answer any questions that potentially our listeners have. And so listeners, send us in your questions. What questions do you have for us in general? What questions do you have for Alex? Send them to podcastquestions@theailab.ai. We'd love to hear from you. I'd love to have you back, Alex, and see if we get any questions and ask you to answer them.
Thank you, Melissa. This was super fun.